Hey, thank you all for joining us. This is Dan at Unicorn Riot. We're expecting court to come back hopefully within a few minutes for the afternoon session of day 11. So we've been hearing testimony from the defense, which started today. Stephen I. James, a Missouri police officer / ex-SWAT type officer who does a lot of trainings, gave testimony in support of Potter and try to challenge the state's witness, and so forth. One second. It's trying to challenge Seth Stoughton, who was the state's witness. So we can see reflections in the plexiglass, which usually is a sign that things are going to come back pretty soon. But before we get back, I'll just mention what we had uncovered thanks to some friendly tipsters through Twitter and whatnot, that Stephen I. James, who was just testifying, is a user at the website Stormgeware. Apparently, this user, Otto Ridge, posted the same email and phone address that Mr. James used in his official CV that is hosted on mncourts.gov. So that was kind of striking that this man is, and we're not, alleging anything illegal here, but it is significant. This website here is named after a Hitler propaganda term for a gun that the Nazis produced, and it's been around for 20 years, offering kind of restricted access gun services. So the jury's coming back, but we just found the last witness was on that forum, but we believe it's no evidence it's illegal, but it seems significant that this is something this guy does.
Okay, please be seated.
So thank you for tuning in. It's going to get going now.
The defense may call its next witness. Would you please come forward and stand behind the witness chair? Raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in connection with this case?
I do.
Please have a seat. Would you remove your mask, please? And then state your full name and spell it.
Sure. My name is Timothy, Timothy, Patrick, Patrick, Gannon, Gannon.
All right, a couple things to keep in mind when you're testifying. The court reporter is taking down everything, so you have to answer with a yes or a no instead of shaking your head or saying uh-huh or uh-uh. If you don't understand a question, please ask for clarification. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately. Don't answer unless I tell you to. And please don't talk over each other wait until the question's finished before you answer. Okay?
Thank you.
Counsel?
We know your name is Timothy Gannon, correct?
Yes,
How old are you, Mr. Gannon?
I am 53.
And I'm going to trace your history. Where did you go to school, high school?
High school, I went to Fridley High School.
And after Fridley, where did you go to school?
I did.
Where did you go to?
I actually enrolled in North Hennepin Community College in Brooklyn Park.
And how long were you there?
I was there about 3 years.
And what did you major in at the school?
Originally, my major was criminal justice or law enforcement.
And after 3 years, what did you do, if anything?
Well, within that 3 years, I had a break. So after my first year of college, I figured I was a 2-year track, so I could become a police officer, but I was nowhere mature enough or able to become a police officer. So I thought I would do something different. So I did enlist in the Marine Corps. And in between my college, I was a Marine Corps military policeman.
And I suspect that was a little different than going to college.
It was a lot different, yes.
So how long were you in the military, in the Marine Corps? The first
So
time?
my original duty time was just during training, so the boot camp and also the MP school, and then I served out the rest of my time. It was supposed to be the rest of my time in reserve duty back here in Minnesota.
And did you get called back to duty, though? Active duty?
In 1990 and 91, I was called to active duty for the Gulf War, the first Gulf War.
And did you see combat in that war?
I did.
And how long were you there again? I'm sorry.
We were activated for approximately 6 months of duty.
Did you then return home?
I did.
And did you start school again?
Yes, I had then transferred down to Mankato State University, and I was in direction of getting my 4-year college degree, again in law enforcement and criminal justice.
And how long did it take you down at Mankato to get your degree?
It took me a little bit longer because of those interruptions and also because of the active duty. So I graduated in 1993.
After you graduated in 1993, I take it you went and looked for a job?
I did.
And was that in police enforcement, law enforcement?
Yes, I chose to be in law enforcement, correct.
And that was your major?
It was.
Did you, after applying for jobs, did you get a job at the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
I did in 1994.
And was Kimberly Potter there already, or was that after you came?
She came after I was already there, so I believe in 1995.
All right. And so once she arrived there, you met her and worked with her on occasion?
I did.
Was she on the same shift that with you once she started there?
No, we had basically gone to different shifts. I would see her in some of the shift work that we would do, but we were not on the same rotation or shifts.
Okay. Let's talk about your career there for a while. After you started there, you were a patrol officer, correct?
Correct.
And tell the jury about your rise up to the top.
Sure. I think my track was basically, my career track was similar to a lot of officers when they first start. I wanted to be exposed to everything. I wanted to be a trainer. I wanted to be a firearms instructor, a use of force instructor, a field training officer. And of course, as most people want to do, they want to be on a SWAT team. I was on the emergency operations team. So I basically soaked in everything that I could early on in my career in Brooklyn Center, and I was given the opportunity to do so.
All right. And you have to slow down a little bit because the court reporter's looking at me in a strange way. Okay. So how about your promotions at the Brooklyn Center Police Department? Why don't you tell the jury about those?
Sure. So my rise within the Brooklyn Center Police Department, the rank structure is you can become a sergeant or a detective, and then above that rank you can become, at that time, a lieutenant, which later would be called a commander. So my rise basically through the ranks was, in about 2004, I was promoted to a sergeant position, and I was a sergeant for a very, very short period of time, about a year, a little bit over a year, and then a commander position or lieutenant position became available, and I tested for that, applied for that, and I was able to get that position, and I was a commander for quite a long time within the police department.
And when you say you tested for it, it was a written test, is that right?
No, it was an application process, and you had to have prerequisites such as a 4-year degree.
All right. So now you're a commander. And what year was that?
2005.
As a commander, I believe we heard in this case that there's 3 commanders and 1 chief, and the commanders answer to the chief. Is that right?
Yes,
And below the commanders are the sergeants. Is that?
correct.
So what division were you a commander in?
Sure. So within the police department, there's 3 different divisions. There's the investigative division, the patrol division, and also the community engagement or community services, which is the kind of the outreach department within the agency. I was able to rotate through all those positions. In each position, I was there for 2 to 3 years. I did serve a little bit longer as a patrol commander, and I went through that rotation twice.
And Kimberly Potter was in the patrol division. Is that right?
Yes.
And how long were you the commander in the patrol division?
Sure. I think my first tenure within the patrol was a lengthy time. It was either 5 to 6 years, and then when I rotated through, it was shorter. But it was the first one was 5 to 6 years. The second one was probably 2 to 3 years. So a total of 8 years as a commander.
And Kimberly Potter worked under you during that time? She was a patrol officer?
Correct.
And what kind of a police officer was she, based on how she worked with you?
She was a fine officer. She
Reserve the objection that previously made.
Okay, the objection is overruled, but the state's objection is noted.
Go ahead. I believe you were interrupted when you said she was a fine officer.
She was a fine officer, and there's certain things within the department that you get known for. Are you handling your calls? Are you professional when you talk with people? Are you doing good police reports? She was known for doing all those things.
What about her volunteer work? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with that. Early on in her career, she did volunteer and began working for LIMA.
What's that?
LIMA is a Law Enforcement Memorial Association.
Slow down just a little bit.
Sure. It's a law enforcement memorial association, and basically what they do is they lend support to fallen officers and their families. They are at funerals. They also very extensively help the families go through this process, which can be very traumatic and tragic.
And that would be law enforcement that was killed on duty, correct?
In the line of duty,
In
yes.
the line of duty. Was she also on a DART committee?
Sure. DART is our domestic abuse response team. So one of the initiatives that I had brought forward with the help of my command staff was a follow-up where we'd have domestic abuse survivors, and a lot of times they wouldn't get all the resources they need at the original time of call. And what the DART team would do is they'd follow up afterwards, even the next day, to make sure that that survivor has all the benefits that they need, that they're talking to an advocate, that if they have any questions about the upcoming trial, they supply them with that. So a select group of officers would do that.
And she was one of them.
She was one of the original members.
Also, was she an FTO when you worked there?
She was a field training officer for a long time. One of the things related to that is we don't get very many senior officers to do the field training officer program because they're basically they've had a lot. They've done a lot over their careers, and they leave that up to other officers. We have a few senior officers that still do that, and she was one of them.
And did you continue to be the chief of Brooklyn Center Police Department up until April of this year?
I was promoted to the chief position in September of 2015, and I served in that position until April of this year.
Yeah, and what happened in April of this year?
Officer Potter, or Kim Potter, was involved in the shooting incident, and the aftermath of that related to the political pressures within the city. I was no longer allowed to stay as the chief of police.
And was that because you would not terminate her until she had a due process hearing? Objection.
The objection is overruled on that ground. You may answer.
I believe one of the reasons that I was required or requested to leave the agency was because I would not immediately fire Kim Potter.
Did Kim Potter leave voluntarily after that? Quit her job?
She did resign her position to me while I was still the chief.
Let's go to April 11th of this year. You were still chief at that time,
I was.
and that was the day that a critical incident happened, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you, you weren't at the critical incident at any time, were you?
I was off duty at the time.
And however, you did look at BWC body-worn cameras afterwards, is that correct?
I did.
The objection is overruled.
I'm trying to lead you into that, sir. Did you observe body-worn cameras after the incident?
Yes, I did.
And what body-worn cameras, if any, did you observe?
So on the night of the incident, I had been called in, and I was at the police station, triaging the situation, working through the incident. I was advised by a BCA agent to take a look at the body-worn camera footage from Kim Potter's camera, and that's what I did.
Later on, at some time after, later, did you look at more body-worn camera?
I looked at one other camera angle much later, and that was the squad cameras. So within the police department, our officers carry and have on their person a body-worn camera, but also early on in the process, we had mounted squad cameras that can watch and can monitor outside of the car directly.
So you're able to see inside the car before the stop, is that right?
Yes,
And you saw the stop, and you saw the arrest, and you saw the aftermath, correct?
I did.
And after observing, viewing all of those incidents and the body-worn cameras, did you see anything based on your knowledge and experience that her conduct was consistent with her training at the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
When I viewed both camera angles and had all the data in front of me, I saw no violation
No violation of what?
of policy, procedure, or law.
And the policy and procedure at Brooklyn Center Police Department, to your knowledge, since you're the chief, followed the law of use of force, is that right?
Yes, it does.
Now, in a critical incident, there are there's shooting, sometimes violence, chaos. In your experience, going back your years of being a law enforcement officer, had you in the past, before April 11th, been involved in critical incidents?
Yes, I have.
Was there one that stands up in your mind as memorable?
Yes.
Was that a critical incident where you were almost dragged in a car, or you were actually dragged for a while?
That is correct.
Your Honor, reading relevance.
Trying to get to the issue, Your Honor.
Notice.
The objection is overruled. You may answer, or I'll let the answer stand. Officer, could you please remember to pause a little bit and stop talking when there's an objection, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
The objection was overruled, so you can answer my question.
I was involved in a situation where I was dragged by a car.
And what went through your mind when you were dragged by that car?
Sheer terror, trying to recall my training, what I had been exposed to before that, and simply trying to survive.
That one incident, after you were dragged by that car, I take it you lived, but did you remember the aftermath of that, what happened immediately after you were dragged?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
We need
It
to
goes to her
sidebar.
testimony, Your Honor.
Counsel, we need to sidebar.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. We've been hearing from Timothy Gannon, who was the Brooklyn Center Police Department officer. People might recall that he quit pretty dramatically. He accused the mayor of letting protesters into a press conference and a bunch of other stuff. So he's been, part of this whole thing. He's sort of a main figure in the middle of it. So thank you all for tuning in. You can see Kim Potter over there on the right, being involved in the sidebar. Earl Grey is speaking. And, sidebars are set up in such a way that the jury can't hear what they're arguing about, the points of law, and so on and so forth.
Okay, the objection is sustained on relevance.
Now let's back up to what you viewed in the body-worn camera and the squad camera. You viewed that after Officer Lucky stopped, my hair is all messed up because of that thing. I'm told that Officer Lucky, he stopped the vehicle. He was the trainee at the time, is that right?
Yes.
And did you notice anything about his procedure in doing that was an error?
Yes.
What was that?
I think when he made the decision to make a custodial arrest, I think at that time when he got Mr. Wright out of the vehicle, what training tells us to do is to move him to the rear of the car, away from the open door, or close the door behind him.
Okay.
That would be something that you would learn later that you would do as a procedural issue as far as a
And an
traffic arrest.
FTO, unless it was some type of an emergency situation, would not interfere at the time he was performing the arrest to correct that. Is that a fair statement?
Objection needed.
I'll let him answer. You may answer.
As a field training officer, I would not have corrected that action until afterwards during a debrief.
After Mr. Wright was asked to come out of the car and he was being handcuffed, he broke away, correct?
Yes, it appeared that way on the video.
Anything about what Officer Lucky did, or Officer Potter did, or in fact what Sergeant Johnson did and the chaos that happened after that, any violation of policy that you saw in that?
I did not.
In your opinion, could a taser be used to stop him from fleeing?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for a legal conclusion.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
Could a taser be used in that situation?
A taser could have been used in that situation.
And also, as a result of the Officer Johnson being partway in the car and Officer Lucky standing by the other side of the car and both car doors open, they could have been seriously injured if the car would have went in reverse. Is that right?
Yes,
And that would be a great bodily harm. Is that correct?
correct.
So, is it your opinion that not only could a taser be used in this chaotic situation, but also a gun? Is that right?
That is correct.
And that's based on your viewing of the videos, correct?
Yes.
And your experience. How many years are you experienced as a law enforcement officer?
Just about 27 years.
And you know you're under oath.
Yes, I am.
And you're not doing any favors for Miss Potter, are you?
Objection needed.
Well, are you doing any favors for her by saying this?
I am not.
And that's your opinion based on your experience as a law enforcement officer
Yes.
and an ex-chief, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you presently employed?
I am.
And what is your job?
I'm a business agent for Law Enforcement Labor Services, or LELS.
And law enforcement labor services,
A little tech glitch here.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Gannon.
Oh.
Thank you for coming in. Your entire law enforcement career, well, I was going to say was at Brooklyn Center, but you also worked as a military police officer in the Marines, correct?
Correct.
But outside of the Marines, it was entirely with Brooklyn Center, correct?
Yes, sir.
And a total of 27 years on that job.
Just about 27 years, yes, sir.
And it's a difficult job, isn't it?
Yes,
Rewarding job,
certainly.
but it's a dangerous job sometimes, correct?
Yes,
And when you're out there, you have to rely on the other officers around you to help keep you safe,
yes,
and you have to rely on other officers. Well, other officers rely on you to keep them safe.
correct.
Common to back up other officers on even just traffic stops.
Yes,
And it builds sort of a camaraderie, doesn't it, among officers?
yes, it does.
And
your water's over here. My water. I didn't mean to interrupt you, you know that. I lost my mask.
not my data, keep track of
I need a new mask.
COVID has affected us in many ways, hasn't it? Sorry about the interruption. And Kim Potter became a part of that camaraderie aspect of your life, your professional life.
Yes,
And did you know her personally at all, in personal context?
yes.
And what kinds of stuff did you do outside of work?
Social gatherings, friends getting together, different anniversaries, things that would come up, but there'd be time to time that we would get together on a personal basis with her family.
So also personal friends.
Yes,
And you actually did work shifts with her?
yes, we did.
And that matter that she did for, well, I call it the honor guard, but I think you had a different term for it, the Lima, maybe?
I'm sorry?
Okay, I've been referring to it as the honor guard. Is that the same thing that you were talking about?
Yes, honor guard is, I guess, a subset of Lima. Yeah,
And that's really an important support service for law enforcement families, isn't it?
I'd agree with that.
You really admired her for doing that.
I did.
And when she was working for the DART program, she was no longer really out on the street every day doing patrol, right?
No, that's incorrect.
Okay, tell me.
So the DART team was basically an offshoot of the patrol. So basically, you'd still be in patrol operations and be a patrol officer, but you would make time in your shift to go back and do the follow-up with the survivor and make sure that they have the services. So they do both duties.
Got it, thank you. And then on April 11th of this year, when you learned about this incident, you learned about it that night, correct?
Basically, early in the afternoon, yes.
Okay. And at some point, did you learn that it was Miss Potter who had fired a gun and caused the death of that young man?
Yes.
Did that surprise you?
Yes, it did.
And at that point that evening, you watched her body cam video, correct?
Yes, I did.
And I was a little unclear. You said at some point you watched the squad camera, sometime after that, but I wasn't sure about when after that you also watched the dashboard cam.
Within the dash cam, I have not had access to that camera footage other than the initial camera that I saw.
Officer Potter's body cam.
Correct.
And at the time, when you watched that, you concluded that she did not mean to fire her firearm.
Correct.
And you decided that night to release the video to the public, to show the public that.
Yes, I did.
And it's your understanding that because you refused to fire her, you were not going to be allowed to stay as the chief of police.
I believe there were multiple situations or reasons that I was given. That was one of them. I believe the other reason was my handling of the riots that occurred that night and the next night in front of the police department. Those were things that were pointed out to me that that was in conflict with the elected body.
And you disagreed with those reasons,
Yes, I did.
and particularly with what the shall we say, suggestion to fire her, the request to fire her.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And that's because you thought she should be entitled to some due process, right, before she were to be fired.
We have a policy in place to do administrative investigations, and they entail being thorough, being impartial, and being fair. And I don't think I could have done any one of those three things if I were to make that decision that day.
And so you essentially felt that you were being forced out of the job.
Correct.
And but instead you resigned, right?
Resigned in lieu of termination.
And were allowed then to keep all the benefits, that retirement benefits that come with the job.
Correct.
Now you work for the agency, the Law Enforcement Legal Services, that also provides legal services to officers for on-duty incidents.
Yes, I was unemployed for about 6 months, and I've just recently been employed.
Your agency, well, shouldn't call it that, should I? Where you previously worked at Brooklyn Center, had a policy about officer-involved shooting incidents.
Correct.
And the policy required that the investigation of that kind of incident be referred to an outside agency.
Yes, sir.
And that day even, April 11th, you made the decision to authorize the BCA to do the investigation.
Correct.
And the purpose of that is to avoid any potential bias in the investigation, correct?
That is the intent.
It's also to provide some transparency so that people see that that bias is not going to play, the potential bias is going to play a part in the decision, correct?
Correct.
But today you think you have none of that bias in order to offer the opinions that Mr. Gray asked you to offer.
With the video evidence that I've seen today, or within the last 6 months, I believe I can make that decision.
You did an interview with the media on November 14th of 2021. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And that was really about the aspect of how you lost your job there at Brooklyn Center.
It was about the inner workings of working with the political ramifications of decision making. Yes.
And in that interview, you refused to discuss the actual killing of Mr. Wright because you thought you might be a witness in the case.
Correct.
What made you think on November 14th that you might be a witness in the case?
I had the belief that either the prosecution or the defense would call me as a witness in some capacity. I was a police chief.
And had the defense contacted you at that point?
I believe at that point they had contacted me.
So at that point in time when you were contacted by the defense, you had only reviewed Ms. Potter's body-worn camera, correct?
Correct.
And so the only aspect of the case that you had at the time was from Ms. Potter's body-worn camera, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, you did not see any danger for the other officers that would have justified the use of deadly force, as you've said today.
I did see some danger on the driver's side in case the vehicle went in reverse, but I did not see the situation of Michael Johnson on the other side of the car.
So you've been involved in a lot of traffic stops, I assume?
Yes, sir.
Have you had some people flee from you at a traffic stop?
Yes, I have.
Did any of them drive in reverse to the squad car when they fled from you?
No, they have not.
Doesn't make any sense for somebody to put it in reverse when there are two squad cars behind them to flee.
No.
When you, well, prior to that media interview, you had actually been, had sat down and talked with the defense attorneys on November 8th, correct?
Yes.
And in that interview at that time, you were of the opinion that Sergeant Johnson was leaning into the passenger side of the car when Mr. Wright tried to drive away, correct?
Correct.
So that's something you felt you knew at that time to offer an opinion on, correct?
I need to stand corrected because I have to remember exactly when I saw the video that was reflected on the squad camera. Once I saw the squad camera angle, I believe that Mr. Johnson was hanging inside the car at the time of the incident.
Well, hanging inside the car was not the word you used in the interview with the defense attorneys, is it?
I don't recall.
Would it help to refresh your recollection if I showed it to you?
Yes.
All right. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Yes.
Where's the quote? That's not a quote, that's a report. Yeah, it's not. For the record, Your Honor, that wasn't a quote. It was a report.
Okay, counsel, member, no speaking objections. Oh, my God.
That's what I apologize.
All right.
This one.
Is there an objection?
Maybe you heard that?
Yes.
Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We're on day 11. This is the first day of defense testimony. Tim Gannon was the former Brooklyn Center Police Department chief when Kim Potter killed Daunte Wright, and as you're hearing, he was fairly sympathetic to it, so that's the context here. You can see Potter sitting on the right in the middle of that group with the two other defense attorneys flanking her, and then the state's prosecutors are on the left. So we're just sort of going through his take on what happened. And we're on cross-examination by Matthew Frank, who's the state prosecutor right now.
Objection is sustained.
At the time of the interview in November 8th of 2021, you believed as simply that Mr. Johnson, Sergeant Johnson, I'm sorry, was leaning into the car, correct?
Was in the car, yes, and leaning in the car.
All right. And second time then you met with defense counsel was December 6th of this year, correct?
Correct.
So after the trial had begun.
Yes.
And you were then, from them, shown these other videos, correct?
The two videos.
Yeah, I think earlier you referenced the dash camera from Officer Lucky's squad. And then what else did you reveal?
The body-worn camera footage from Officer Potter at the time.
Right. But that you watched day one, right?
Yes.
And then, so the only other video you've watched since then has been Officer Lucky's dash camera?
Correct.
Okay. And that is what you did when you met with counsel on December 6th?
Yes.
So it was only upon looking at that that you've arrived at this opinion about deadly force?
Correct.
Have you watched Sergeant Johnson's body cam?
I have not.
Have you interviewed any of the witnesses?
I have not.
Have you ever in your career offered an opinion on whether an officer's conduct was reasonable for a use of force evaluation?
I have reviewed, for IAs as a police chief, I've had to review a lot of internal affairs investigations, and I've had to make determinations based on the evidence that was presented to me.
And in making that determination, what you're determining, you're determining whether their conduct was consistent with what you said today, right? The policies and practices of the department.
Of the department, yes.
Because an officer could be disciplined by the department.
Correct.
You were not, in those situations, making a legal determination about the reasonable use of force.
I was not.
And your opinion today is solely that Officer Potter's conduct at the time was consistent with policies and practices of your department.
Correct. I'll make sure I got my numbers right. You became a commander in 2005, correct? 2005.
And a commander position is one that is largely administrative?
Yes, it's a variety of roles, but yes, administrative.
In the office, day hours?
Correct.
And have you carried a taser every day on your job since 2005?
I have not.
You have offered that Mr. Wright should not have been allowed to leave the scene, correct?
Correct.
And that's because there was a warrant for his arrest.
Correct.
And would officers, well, it's true, isn't it, that in making that arrest, officers still have to use reasonable force?
Correct.
You're not saying that anytime somebody tries to get in their vehicle and drive off during an arrest, an officer can shoot them?
That is correct. Not every time somebody gets in their car is an officer have the ability to shoot them. No.
From the dashboard camera, you were still able to determine that Sergeant Johnson's feet were planted on the ground during the incident, correct?
I believe he was still grounded, but a large portion of his body was inside the car.
But that's from the perspective of the dashboard camera.
That is correct.
did not watch Sergeant Johnson's body-worn camera to get his first-person perspective, did you?
I have not.
Did you, well, so then you also don't know whether Sergeant Johnson was able to prevent Mr. Wright from driving off by holding onto the shift knob.
I am not aware of that.
And you also do not know that Sergeant Johnson was able to prevent, whether Sergeant Johnson was able to prevent Mr. Wright from driving off by grabbing a hold of his right arm and pulling it towards the passenger door.
I
Does
do.
object to that in the statement of testimony?
All right, members of the jury, you rely on your own memory as to what the evidence showed. Okay? You may continue.
Before deploying a taser, officers should consider the surroundings of the person they intend to tase, correct?
Correct.
As the police chief, as a fellow police officer, you would not want an officer shooting their taser in the direction of other officers or civilians.
Correct.
And in the space, well, strike that. So then you would agree, wouldn't you, that Officer Potter's decision to try to use a taser put the passenger of the vehicle and Officer Johnson at risk of being struck by the taser?
I would not agree with that.
Why not?
At that distance that she was within Mr. Wright, the prongs and the distance that they travel apart is very concise and very close. So I think her target that she was looking at doing would have been center mass at the chest and area. I don't think those prongs would have had enough time because they have to travel farther to get the distance apart. So I don't think that was in any way a danger to the passenger or to Michael Johnson because the prongs would have been very close to a tight group.
In watching Officer Potter's body-worn camera, you saw that Mr. Wright was moving around a bit as he was trying to leave.
Correct.
So it was a moving target.
Correct.
Judge, I object to that as argumentative, and also a misstatement of what the body camera showed.
All right, again, members of the jury, rely on your own memory, okay?
Incidentally, are you certified to carry a taser?
I am certified to carry a taser.
So you go through the training every year as well?
I do.
You understand the need to get a good probe spread to get a good neuromuscular incapacitation.
If at all possible, yes.
And that the more distance you have, the better off, the more likely you are to get that.
Correct.
You're familiar with the type of taser cartridges that your department started using with the Taser 7 this year?
I'm somewhat familiar with it. I did go through the taser qualification, but I've not handled them since I resigned. It's been quite a while, and we did intro them into the department this year.
Your Honor, I'd like to put Exhibit 246 on the stand, please.
You may.
What number was it?
246.
246.
Do you see that in front of you then?
Yes.
Sometimes I know we get kind of a glare on that screen if you need to move it. Do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
And this is Ms. Potter's certification for the Taser 7 transition, correct?
Yes.
Below the 4 check marks in blue, there are 2 boxes, and one has an X in it, correct?
Yes.
And so this is indicating that at least for this certification, the close quarters cartridge had not been used?
Correct.
When you saw the video from Ms. Potter's body cam, she was quite upset, correct?
Yes, she was.
Did you feel bad for her at the time?
I did.
Still feel bad for her?
I do.
So the manner in which Officer Lucky brought Mr. Wright out of the car, you thought it would have been better for Officer Lucky to bring him back behind the car, correct?
One thing I hate to do as a police chief is Monday morning quarterback somebody's actions, but I do stand by what I said. It would have been preferable for him to move him back away from that open door frame, but again, I'm looking at it from a perspective many months later.
But not concerning enough for you to believe that an FTO at the time should have corrected that right at the time?
No, from what I watched, it looked as if Mr. Wright was going to cooperate. He initially got out of the vehicle, and sometimes that does put officers off, and they think that there's going to be a compliant individual, and then things change very drastically and quickly. I think it would have been a coaching moment for Kim Potter to have with her probationary after the call.
You testified that a taser could have been used in that situation, and you agreed with that.
Yes.
And that situation is basically what you saw on the dash cam and her body-worn camera.
Correct.
So when you offer the jury this opinion about using your taser was consistent with policy and practice in Brooklyn Center, it's because you believe that Mr. Wright was not in control of his vehicle when he was shot, so it was an acceptable decision to use the taser.
From the video images I saw, he was not in control of his vehicle at the time that she would be deploying the taser, if that's what the tool that she used.
Okay. And that's what you said, is that he wasn't, and you didn't see him in control of the vehicle, so it would be okay for her to use the taser.
Yes.
Because if he was in control of the vehicle, it would not have been a good idea to use the taser, correct?
Correct.
Because he could have been incapacitated and the vehicle could have moved.
Yes.
If he was not in control of the motor vehicle at that time, as you believe, then there also was at that same time no threat of harm to Sergeant Johnson, correct?
Oh, I disagree with that.
Is it consistent with policy and practice for an officer, a police officer, to not know they have their gun in their hand when they shoot somebody?
Could you rephrase the question or repeat it, please?
Sure. Is it consistent, in your opinion, with policy and practice for an officer to not know they have their firearm in their hand?
Redirect, Mr. Gray.
Ex-Police Chief Gannon,
Yes, sir.
would you lie under oath to help a friend out?
Sir, there's a reason why I'm an ex-chief. Nobody gets to say something or do something that I don't believe in. I wouldn't lie for anyone.
Thank you.
Anything further?
Just briefly, Your Honor. You're offering today your opinions.
That is correct.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Is there any further redirect? No? Is there any further redirect? Okay. Thank you. You may step down. Okay, the defense may call its next witness.
You call Colleen Frick.
Okay. Please stand behind the witness chair and raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify?
I do.
Please have a seat. Remove your mask, please, and state your full name and spell it.
Colleen, Colleen. Michael, Mychal. Fricky, Fricke.
The court reporter is taking down everything that's being said. Please answer with a yes or a no instead of shaking your head. And don't say uh-huh and uh-uh. Only one person can talk at a time. Wait until the question's finished before you answer. If you don't understand a question, let the lawyer know. And finally, if an objection is made, please stop talking immediately and don't answer the question unless I tell you to. Okay. Counsel?
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Fricky, you're employed by which police department?
The City of Brooklyn Park Police Department.
How long have you been employed there?
Since May of 2021.
How old are you?
40 years old.
A little slower.
40 years old.
Okay. Give us your educational background, please.
I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and public administration and a master's degree in criminal justice.
What institutions did you graduate from?
St. Cloud State University.
For both.
Correct.
Were you formerly employed with another police department before your current employment?
I was previously employed with the Brooklyn Center Police Department.
When did you start there?
In March of 2008.
What were your initial roles and duties there?
I was hired as a patrol officer.
And did you stay in that capacity throughout your work there?
I had different assignments. I filled a role as a juvenile officer for a few years. I was a sergeant for 3 years.
Okay. While you worked there, did you come to know former Officer Potter?
I did.
How did you come to know her?
We worked on the same shift together for several years.
Did she become for you a mentor and friend?
Yes.
And did you spend quite a bit of time with her?
Yes, I did.
Did you have a chance to observe her working in the community?
Yes, I did.
Did you have a chance to observe her with suspects of crime, for example?
Yes.
Okay. Did you find her to be patient?
I did.
Polite.
Objection, Your Honor. Prior court ruling.
Yes. Counsel, the objection is sustained.
Was she I'm sorry about that. Was she a good police officer?
Yes, she was.
Was she an FTO?
Yes.
Did you work on the DART program with her?
I did.
What is DART again?
It's a domestic abuse response team.
What was your role in that?
I led the team, supervised the team.
And what did you do with respect to Officer Potter in terms of the DART team?
She was a member of the team, so I would assign cases to her and follow up with her to, check in on the work that she was doing with the victims and families.
And you've supervised her work, did you not?
Yes.
Were you aware of whether or not during your employment at Brooklyn Center that Officer Potter had fired her weapon?
No.
Were you aware that she had ever fired a taser?
No.
As a matter of policy, are you familiar with the policies of Brooklyn Center Police Department?
Yes.
As a matter of policy, would an officer be allowed to ignore a bench warrant for a gun charge and let an individual leave the scene instead of making an arrest?
No, that wouldn't be typical.
You would have to make the arrest.
Yes.
You were summoned to the scene on April 11th, were you not?
I was.
And you were assigned to Officer Potter to be with her. Am I right about that?
Yes.
And stayed with her from the scene and into the Brooklyn Park Police Department. Is that right?
Brooklyn Center Police
Brooklyn
Department.
Center, I'm sorry. I know there is a distinction. Did you have a chance to observe Officer Potter while she was at the Brooklyn Center Police Department in a room by herself?
I did.
What did you observe in that regard?
I saw her curled up in the corner of the room.
What room was she in?
She was. It was a meeting room. I don't know a name for it.
Was she by herself?
Yes.
Crying?
Yes.
In all the years of working with her in Brooklyn Center, do you have an opinion as to her reputation for peacefulness?
Yeah, I think she's a remarkable.
Objection, Your Honor. Prior court rule.
Well, excuse me, I'll let you finish your answer. Okay.
I wanted to ask you to focus on her reputation for being peaceful in the community. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not she has a reputation for being peaceful?
Yeah, I think she has a positive reputation.
Okay. And do you have do you have an opinion as to her reputation in the community for being law-abiding?
Yeah.
What's your opinion?
That she is law-abiding.
I have no further questions.
Is there any cross?
Officer Fricke, you began your law enforcement career in 2008,
Correct.
and you remained with Brooklyn Center through April of 2021.
Through May of 2021.
May.
Yes.
Okay. And during your entire career, the defendant was a coworker up until obviously April 11th.
Correct.
And you worked alongside her as a patrol officer,
Correct.
shift after shift, year after year.
Not from the day I was hired until the day I left there.
Okay. In addition to those years, though, that you did work with patrol and in the DART program, you developed a relationship with her beyond a professional relationship.
Yes.
You talked on the phone.
Yes.
You texted with each other.
Yes.
You got together a few times a year outside of work.
Yes.
You were friends.
Yes.
Right. You'd say that you and the defendant communicated a lot during your career, both inside and outside of work.
Primarily inside of work, yes.
Yep. And you were contacted by the defense to provide a statement on November 8th of this year?
Yes.
Okay. And you've talked to the defendant herself on the phone after this incident multiple times, correct?
I wouldn't say multiple.
Do you remember saying multiple times back on November 5th of 2021?
I don't remember the verbiage that I used then.
Okay. Now, I do want to talk about your actions on April 11th. On that day, you were working a patrol shift, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's the same shift that Officer Potter was working at that day?
Correct.
And as part of your duties, you paid attention to the radio communications?
Correct.
And around 2 p.m., you knew that Officer Potter and Officer Lucky had initiated a traffic stop, correct?
Yes.
And you were at the police station at that time?
Correct.
You heard a further report about a crash and then a report of shots fired, correct?
Correct.
And you drove to the scene?
Yes.
And you knew that a shots fired call is perhaps the most serious call you can respond to as a police officer, correct?
It's serious.
Yep. But even at that time, you did not know who was shot, why they were shot, where they were shot.
Correct.
But nonetheless, use of a firearm could seriously injure and kill someone, correct?
The objection is sustained.
I'd like to talk to you about the response that you had to the scene, which was discussed on direct examination.
Also beyond the scope.
Sidebar, Your Honor.
So thanks for tuning in. We're on day 11 of the Kim Potter trial. Kim Potter's on trial for shooting Daunte Wright on April 11th, 2021. So this is essentially a kind of character witness. The judge said that 3 of them are allowed. So the last one we heard was the chief at the time, who was essentially forced to resign in the aftermath of Kim Potter killing Wright. And he said that he didn't generally see needs to second guess officers. That was one remark that he made that jumped out at me. So Colleen Fricke is at the Brooklyn Park Police Department now, but was obviously very close to the defendant before she killed Daunte Wright. So that's what we're hearing now on this first day. Thank you all for tuning in. This is Dan at Unicorn Riot. Thank you, Nico. Nico's been sending over some videos, so we'll be able to run an interview with that Mayor Mike Elliott from Brooklyn Center and another community event as well. So stay tuned for that. That'll be in a little bit when the break comes up, which could be within the next 30-40 minutes perhaps for the afternoon break. We do really appreciate your support. If you can donate to us at unicornriot.ninja. A few folks have been telling me on the chats, that they can chip in today, which is really awesome. We really depend on the small donor support, raising small donations gives us the independence to kind of go after these stories, not have to kind of approach things the way that the usual conventional mainstream media does. And we're a 501c3, so it's tax deductible, your donations. And we're also on Patreon. So thanks for thinking of us, everyone. We really appreciate it. And we're on the sidebar. There's a sort of white noise that's kind of played out in the courtroom so that the jury can't hear what they're talking about when they're going over matters of law. And they're on these wireless devices to kind of reduce the risk of COVID transmission. And obviously with the way that Paul Eng and Earl Grey sound, I do kind of worry that they have COVID. I hope they've been tested recently because they're both pretty rumpled sounding people. So let's see. Yeah, so Nico has been clipping up some clips for us, kind of helping out on the back end stuff today. Much appreciate the help with that, Nico. So just give me 1 second. We'll see. All right. And on a programming note, I think this might be the. Well, we'll get back to it.
The objection is still sustained.
Eventually, Officer Fricke, you did function on November 11th as Officer Potter's escort officer. Am I correct?
On April 11th, yes.
You encountered her at the scene and then you went back to the police station with her.
Yes.
You arrived with her at the same time?
Yes.
Do you recall when you walked into the police station, Officer Potter walking away from you?
Yes, she's walking in front of me.
And then she entered a conference room and closed the door.
I don't recall if she closed the door before I got in there behind her.
Sure, but you were actually only outside of her presence for several seconds, and then you entered the room, correct?
I don't recall the sequence.
Okay. How long did you leave her alone as her escort officer on November 11th?
I wouldn't say I left her alone.
Okay, so she was just on the other side of the doorway and you walked in just as you entered the police station, correct?
The room that she went into, the entire front of the room is glass. So if I was on the outside of that room, I would have still been able to see her.
Yeah. In other words, she wasn't in the room alone for a long period of time prior to you encountering her, correct?
Correct.
All right. And when you encountered her, you asked if you could sit with her, and she said no.
I don't recall specifically.
Do you recall when she asked you to take your body-worn camera off?
I recall a similar conversation.
Okay. And you did, at her request, take your body-worn camera off, correct?
I removed it from my clip and placed it on a table.
And then she did not want you to be her escort officer anymore, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you stopped being her escort officer. Someone else was assigned to that role?
Somebody else assisted me in that role, yes.
Okay. Now, you agree you weren't present at the scene when the defendant shot Mr. Wright?
It is beyond the scope. The objection is sustained.
Sure. You testified that the defendant had a reputation for having a law-abiding character?
Yes.
Prior to April 11th, the defendant was a law enforcement officer, correct?
Yes.
All right. In terms of following the law, though, generally speaking, you'd agree that following the law on one day does not absolve you from accountability the next day, correct?
Okay. The objection is sustained.
You testified that the defendant had a character for peacefulness?
Yes.
You'd agree that as a police officer, though, she was specifically trained in how to use force, correct?
Yes.
And the weapons that would use force, including firearms and tasers?
It is beyond the scope. The objection is sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Is there a redirect? Okay. All right. You may step down.
Judge, can we have a sidebar here?
Yes.
All right, they're going back on the sidebar. So we'll have a couple new video clips for you on the break. I just wanted to mention that. And this might be my last day producing the trial. We'll see, but I think that's probably the case. So thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. You know, everyone's very supportive, very friendly. It's been great to see good chats going on, Facebook, YouTube. Much respect to everyone. I really appreciate how everyone's been trying to figure out different things about the case. That's really been terrific. So thank you all for that. I'm just going to let it chill here for a minute. It's been a long one. So thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate the support, everybody.
Nicole Tommy Hall.
Okay, please come forward. And would you stand behind the witness chair? Thank you. Raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in connection with this cause?
Yes.
Please take the witness. Okay, please remove your mask. And would you please spell your full name, state and spell your full name?
Thomas Lauren Hall, ThomasLorenHall.
All right, the court reporter is taking down everything that's being said. So only one person can talk at a time. Wait until the question's finished before you answer. Answer yes or no instead of shaking your head or saying uh-huh or uh-uh. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately and don't answer the question unless I tell you to. You can ask for clarification if you don't understand a question. Okay? Counsel?
Thank you. Mr. Hall, how old a fellow are you?
23.
And where are you from?
Champlin, Minnesota.
Where'd you go to high school?
Champlin Park.
Do you have an occasion to know Kim Potter?
Yes.
How did you meet her?
I met her actually at my neighbor's house for the first time, probably about 11 years ago.
And did you become acquainted with her children as well?
Yes.
Are you friends with them?
Yes, I am.
Okay. How much time did you spend over the last 10 years with Miss Potter, Kim Potter, former Officer Potter?
Just about every weekend.
Have you ever been in the military?
Yes, I was.
Which branch did you enroll in?
I was in the Army.
And what was your position in the Army?
I was a 25 uniform, which is a signal system support specialist.
Did you have what is called a security clearance in the Army?
Yes, I did.
What is that?
It pretty much gave me opportunity to be able to listen or tap into a lot of different things because I had a top secret security clearance, so I could be able to be briefed on different situations or scenarios that a lot of people aren't.
Okay. Were you eventually honorably discharged from the Army?
Yes, I was.
And what are you training to do right now?
I am training actually to be a diesel technician at the moment.
And when do you think you'll be done?
I will be done this upcoming August.
And you have employment lined up, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay. Well, during the time that you've spent with, I also wanted to ask you one thing. You wanted me to ask you, are you an Eagle Scout?
Yes, I am.
Okay. During the 10 years or so that you've known Officer Potter and her family, have you been able to obtain an opinion as to her reputation in the community for being law-abiding?
Yes, I have.
And what is that opinion?
Kim always looked at it as just because I'm an officer doesn't give me an opportunity to not have to abide the laws that I have to enforce. Everybody in this world is expected to obey the laws that are enforced by herself and anybody else.
Similarly, do you have an opinion based upon your 10 years or more of knowing her for her reputation in the community for being peaceful?
She has always been an extremely peaceful person, and no matter what was going on or what happened, she was always there to help you or help de-escalate the situation to make it so both sides could understand where they were coming from. And she was always willing to help you out if you had a question on something regarding a situation you were in. She was a very peaceful person.
Kind of a second mother for you.
Yes.
No further questions.
Okay, is there any pause?
Afternoon, Mr. Hall. Just to clarify, your opinion is based on her reputation in the community, and that community would be Champlin, your block, your relationships with her children. Am I correct?
Yes.
All right. Not on the streets of Brooklyn Center?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Anything further?
Just one second.
All right, thank you very much. You may step down. Does the defense have any further witnesses? Okay. Hello, sir. Would you please come forward and stand right next to me behind the chair, the witness chair? Raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in connection with this matter?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please sit down, remove your mask, state your full name and spell it.
Frank, F-R-A-N-K, Roth, R-O-T-H.
All right, a couple things. The court reporter is taking down everything that's being said. Therefore, you have to answer orally instead of shaking your head or saying uh-huh and uh-uh. Don't do that. If you don't understand a question, ask for clarification. If an objection is made, you got to stop talking immediately and don't answer the question unless I tell you to. And the final thing is, two people can't be talking at the same time, so you have to wait until the question is finished before you answer. Okay?
Very good.
All right, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Roth, I understand you've had a career in law enforcement.
Yes, sir, I have.
Would you tell us where you first worked and then the department you ended your career in?
I started as a Robbinsdale police officer in December of 1982. I worked there for a little over 8 years, and then I was employed with the City of Brooklyn Center as a police officer from January of 1991 through August of 2015.
What rank did you achieve at the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
I achieved the rank of sergeant.
Do you know, in that capacity, former officer Kim Potter?
Yes, I do.
Were you her direct supervisor?
I was.
For how long?
Well, I met Kim when she first started in 2004, I believe, and I was an indirect supervisor for a number of years, and then I was her direct supervisor for approximately 10 years.
Do you have an estimate of how many hours you were her direct supervisor over those 10 years?
I do.
And what would that be?
Well, it was a normal work year is 2,080, and it was about 1,800 hours a year for 10 years, so about 18,000 hours.
And during that time, you got to know her pretty well.
I did.
You consider her a friend of yours.
I do.
Was she also involved in the DART program?
She was.
The Honor Guard?
She was a member of the Lima Honor Guard.
And the hostage negotiations team?
Yes, that's a unit that I supervised.
Volunteered for all of those?
Absolutely.
You had a chance to observe her in the community for all those 10 years and have an understanding of what her reputation is in the community?
Yes, I did. We worked very close in Brooklyn Center. We're not a big agency by any means, so quite often the sergeants integrate with the officers many times during the course of a day on calls, the community type relations things, community outreach. I saw Kim in all those aspects.
So you work closely with her?
Very closely.
Well, I want to ask your opinion as to her reputation in the community.
I'm sorry, could you go again, please?
Given how long you worked with her, I wanted to ask you of your opinion as to her reputation in the community for being law-abiding.
It was sterling.
I wanted to also ask you, do you have a personal opinion as to whether she was law-abiding?
Yes, I do.
Same opinion?
It's the expectation that we have as being police officers. She was very good.
Do you have an opinion as to her reputation in the community for being peaceful?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
Kim was extremely peaceful through a lot of the stuff we did with the crisis negotiation, hostage negotiation unit. That was our goal, was peaceful ends to tragic situations. And given the opportunity, Kim got peaceful resolutions.
And that's your personal opinion as well?
That's my personal and trained opinion as her supervisor.
Thank you very much.
All right. Is there a cross, Mr. Larson?
Mr. Roth, could you identify the year you retired? I didn't catch that.
2015.
2015. And I apologize if I said Mr. Roth. It's Sergeant Roth, correct?
You can call me Frank.
But during your career with Brooklyn Center, obviously Officer Potter was a coworker, a fellow police officer, and she worked for you.
Yes, I was her direct supervisor.
And but in addition to that, though, you became friends.
Yes.
And you've been a strong supporter of her.
I do support Kim.
And you've been a strong supporter after this incident on April 11th, 2021.
Yes.
Indeed, do you recall when the defendant sat down for an interview this fall with Star Tribune reporter Rochelle Olson, she had you right with her?
I was with her.
Yep. You were a witness to that interview.
Beyond the scope.
The objection is sustained. It's beyond the scope.
She is someone that wanted you seated next to her for that interview.
Beyond the scope.
It is beyond the scope.
No further questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Does the state have any further witnesses?
One more.
All right, sir. Please come forward. Stand behind the witness chair and raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully respond to questions related to this?
I do.
All right, please have a seat. And would you please remove your mask? State your full name and spell it.
Samuel, Samuel, Ellsworth, Ellsworth, Smith, Smith, the second Roman numeral 2.
Seated in front of you is the court reporter. She's taking down everything that's being said in the courtroom. So we have to make a clear record. So answer questions with a yes or a no instead of shaking your head or saying uh-huh or uh-uh.
Yes, sir.
Only one person can talk at a time. Wait until the question's finished before you start answering. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately. Do not answer the question unless I tell you to. And if you don't understand a question, please ask for clarification.
Yes.
All right. Counsel?
Officer Smith, you're in uniform today?
No, I'm not. I'm civilian clothes.
Is that a tie, I thought? No?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, sorry. All right. You're originally from Burnsville, Minnesota?
Correct.
I want to ask you about your law enforcement career. Did you start out in a city south of here?
Yes, sir. I started in Kansas City, Missouri in
And
2005.
about what year was that?
2005.
What were your initial duties and obligations down in Kansas City?
Patrol.
Was it for the city or a suburb down there?
No, for the city.
How long did you work in Kansas City?
I was sworn officer from 2006 till September of 2014.
And at that time, did you decide to make a move geographically in your life?
Yes.
And where did you move to?
First, we moved to Brooklyn Center and lived there for 1 year, and then we moved to outside suburb.
Did you find employment in Brooklyn Center?
Yes.
And when did you start with the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
September 1st of 2014.
Are you there right now?
Yes.
What were your initial duties with Brooklyn Center Police?
Patrol.
In the course of your employment with the Brooklyn Center Police Department, have you come in contact with former officer Kim Potter?
Yes.
And tell us about that.
When I started there, like I said, September 1st of 14, she was working, she was patrol, and I was actually starting my field training with other officers, and just got to know her through patrol and working different shifts.
You did basic police work with her during these shifts, arrests, transport,
Yes.
talk to her, interviews, all those things?
Yes.
Okay. And during the course of the 6 years or so, a little bit more than that, that you worked for her, did you gain an opinion as to her reputation in the community?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion as to what her reputation in the community is for the trait of being peaceful?
She is well respected and very peaceful, and she was very professional from when I worked with her.
Is that your personal opinion as well?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion as to her reputation in the community for being law-abiding?
Yes.
What is that?
And she's very law-abiding.
Is that your personal opinion?
Yes.
Why?
Because she, in my time working with her, there are times where I was maybe upset with something, and she would counsel me or coach me that, policy says this, or, basically calm me down and instruct me that this is how policy is, So she was a calming force, with a lot of new officers.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Larson?
Officer Smith, you mentioned that, in your opinion, Officer Fricke has a reputation for being peaceful and law-abiding. That's the law enforcement community?
Objection as to the form of question.
I think you meant to say Officer Potter.
Officer Potter, you mean the reputation you're discussing is the reputation she had in the law enforcement community?
Can you restate the question?
You've testified that she had a reputation for being law-abiding and peaceful in the community. You're talking about the law enforcement community.
The law enforcement community and the city of Brooklyn Center.
Okay. Now, you worked patrol with her for 7 years?
I had been employed there for 7 years.
For 7 years, and you had worked on patrol with Officer Potter?
Directly and indirectly. I worked for the first few years. I worked from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay.
I also worked what we refer to as power shift, 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. or 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. and early power cars from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Did you have any other professional interaction with Officer Potter?
Just working, going on calls, and helping, assisting her when she was primary on calls.
Did you have any interaction with her with any other leadership roles that she had within the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
Beyond the scope.
It is beyond the scope. The objection is sustained.
No further questions.
Okay. Thank you. You may step down. Oh, could I get the headsets on?
So they're back on Sidebar. Thank you all for joining us. I just wanted to clarify, we are going to try to keep streaming live, but we go on rotation, and so I think chances are this will probably be the last stream I do. Maybe it won't be, but I just wanted to clarify we are going to keep streaming every day of the trial, and sentencing too. So.
Okay, members of the jury, we're going to stop right now. We're almost done, okay? So we're going to have, the defense will have 2 witnesses on tomorrow. So I'm going to let you go tonight, and we will start up at 9 o'clock. All right? Have a good night.
Sounds like Potter will probably take the stand tomorrow, so it seems like things are wrapping up. We'll hang on there a little bit, and I will have a couple clips to run for you before we go offline today. So we'll have a couple clips. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate the support. Thank you, Nico.
Okay, please be seated. Okay, Mr. Ng, you wanted to make a record.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would move for admission as a court exhibit the video of Colleen Fricke that you've, in your discretion, not allowed us to put it in, but I would like to, we object to your ruling, and I would like to make that a court exhibit, and I'll have Ms. Montgomery give it to your clerk. I assume without objection, just for the court's record.
Yes, we'll make it a court exhibit. Do you have a number? Okay. We do have it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, then the second reason I wanted to take a moment of your time is that yesterday we had extensive discussions about the parameters of Rule 703, and the court ruled that we could not cross-examine Seth Stoughton on his opinion that Mr. Wright would be peacefully arrested in a short order. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the way I heard it anyway. And the court declined our effort to cross-examine him on specific instances where Mr. Wright failed to appear or would run away or escape and be difficult to find. And at the time, I asked to leave the court to make an offer of proof so the record is complete as to what we would have asked him about had we been able to do that. And we do object to your ruling in all due respect. But I do want to make an offer of proof. The offer of proof is that Mr. Wright has repeatedly failed to appear in court, therefore he was difficult to find. There have been bench warrants for his arrest in a number of cases for failing to appear. The cases are 27 CR 19, 20 754. The next case is 27 CR 19 22959. Next case is 27 CR 19-23184. Another one is 27 CR 19-23818. Another one is 27 CR 19-24205. The primary case that we're relying on is that only a month before his death, Mr. Wright was charged with a complaint of carrying a pistol without a permit. And the incident happened on June 30th of 2020 at 16:04 hours, according to the police reports. The police responded to, I'll just quote it, responded to a person with a gun call near 51st and Bryant Avenue North, Minneapolis, Hennepin County. The caller indicated that a light, complexed 17-year-old black male wearing black shirt and shorts and white shoes was waving a black handgun. The male then got into a white Toyota Camry occupied by 4 people, with the driver wearing a red shirt. Officers located the car nearby with a person defendant herein, Daunte Wright, matching the person with the gun's description, sitting in the back seat. Once out of the vehicle, defendant took off running with officers in pursuit and managed to evade officers. Officers at the scene positively identified defendant from prior interactions. A loaded Ruger .45 caliber handgun matching the caller's description was found on the floor of the vehicle where the defendant had been sitting. Another occupant of the vehicle verified it was defendant's gun. Defendant does not have a permit to carry the firearm. This evidence would have been used in cross-examination to refute the expert's opinion that Mr. Wright would have been easily captured or found when his behavior in this instance was to run away. We have other instances of crimes of violence from him that would rebut Mr. Stoughton's thought that he was going to be peacefully arrested. He was charged, Mr. Wright was, with aggravated robbery in the first degree on December 4th, 2019. The case number is 27 CR 19-29850. That case was pending when he was stopped by Officer Lucky. And that again shows that he had a motive to flee to avoid arrest on that particular charge. The facts of that case are rather gruesome, and that is the one where he stayed overnight at a young woman's house and robbed her at gunpoint in the morning after that. This is recounted in my defendant's response to the state's memorandum in opposition to its pretrial motions. I incorporate by reference my brief, which outlines all the instances that I've referenced here. We also have instances of violence for Mr. Wright in that he's been charged in 2 civil complaints, one in 27 CV 216193, where he shot an individual in the leg and assaulted that individual's face and robbed him. And then there was another complaint where he shot someone in the head, and I believe that complaint is 27 CV 217390. And the reason we wanted this evidence in is that we needed to rebut the inference that Mr. Wright has been a peaceful individual, and we appreciate the loss of him by his family and the loss of anybody. But the image of him as being somehow law-abiding and in all ways terrific is undercut by some of his criminal behavior. And so to give the jury a fair image of him and a picture of the facts as we know them today, we would have cross-examined Mr. Stoughton on all of these, and he would have either admitted that he never saw any of it, and he should have, or if he saw it, it never got in his report. So that is the offer of proof, and again, we respectfully disagree with your ruling. I'm not here to grandstand, but I do want to make the record, and I have.
Okay. And you have made the record, and I stand by my original ruling. Any bad acts by Mr. Wright that Officer Potter was aware of, I allowed in, but she was not aware of all these other matters. The issue in this case is Officer Potter's mens rea, or state of mind, when she approached Daunte Wright at that stop. And logically, anything she knew about him would inform her decisions on how to approach him. These things were not within her knowledge. Okay. All right. Is there anything else we need to put on the record? Oh, one other thing. I'm going to finalize the jury instructions this afternoon, and when I get them done, I'll have Zach email them to you tonight. Okay, I should probably take about an hour. I do want you to know, just so you're thinking ahead, that I believe a definition of reasonable force that incorporates the definitions that the experts have acknowledged are controlling a reasonable officer given the totality of the circumstances, something to that effect. I'll send it to you, and we can debate it tomorrow. I also want to alert you that I have thought about Mr. Ng's request for an additional instruction on authorized use of force, in addition to the authorized use of deadly force that both parties submitted. And I am going to allow an instruction to that effect because there's been so much discussion about this taser. Had the state not disputed Officer Potter's intended use of the taser, this wouldn't be a problem, but the state's expert was of the opinion that even a taser was not appropriate or reasonable under the circumstances. You know, obviously, the reasonable use of force instruction would only relate to the taser, not the gun. So it won't constitute a complete defense to the charge because here a person was killed by a gun. So I just want to alert that issue, and if anybody has any comments about that now, I can hear them, or I can hear more detailed argument after you get the draft.
Draft, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else we need to put on the record? All right. Thank you.
All right, you folks hang in there. We'll have a little bit of new content, new clips to run. So we're just going to wait a second just in case. And trial, we're going to keep covering it on tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. They'll be back. There should be one witness and then Potter. Okay, I think that should be it. Thank you all for joining us. So we're just going to play a few things and hang on 1 second. So we've got a couple things. One is an interview with Mike Elliott a year after George Floyd, so we're going to run that. That's 9 minutes. And then we'll have Write It Forward, which 90 seconds. I'll just run that really quick first. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate the support, everyone. Thank you, Nico, on the back end. Take a look at our website, unicornriot.ninja. We've got a Kim Potter trial landing page that's been updated regularly. And we're going to keep cranking out more stories, and have a great evening, everyone. If you can support our work at the donate link up there at the top, we really appreciate monthly, weekly donors. We're also on Patreon. Thank you, everybody. This has been Dan. I really appreciate the support. Thank you.
We had people all day today write notes or draw and hang them up for people to see, but then we're collecting them all, putting them in a binder, and gifting them to the family to show solidarity. Today is Janelle Austin, one of the founders of the George Floyd Global Memorial, and I's birthday. We realized recently that we had the same birthday, and it also coincided with the beginning of the trial, so we wanted to do something as a gift from us to the family. So as Janelle always says, every piece is, sacred. It doesn't matter if it's a child that scribbled some circles. It means something. It's part of, wanting to give love to the family. And so, we do see each of these as being very sacred.
What is maybe the most touching thing that you've seen up here so far today?
Honestly, it's like the children that just came up and drew some scribbles and then made sure that their name, like, this little kid didn't know how to spell his own name, but he tried to guide me through it, so it was like on there because he was like, that's from me, like, I don't care if it didn't say a thing, it just had some scribbles. That meant the world, I think.
Can you introduce yourself and say what it's like here at George Floyd Square 1 year on?
So my name is Mike Elliott. I'm the mayor of Brooklyn Center. 1 year on here at George Floyd Square.
The atmosphere is peaceful. There's a celebration of George's life, and it's very hopeful, I would say, in terms of people's outlook on what the future is going to bring and the kind of changes that the community really is looking for. And so I think tonight is about a celebration, but it's also about a look to the future to make sure that the changes are put in place so that there isn't another George Floyd, there isn't another Daunte Wright, or Tamir Rice, or Ahmaud Arbery, or the list goes on and on.
And you brought up Daunte Wright. Thank you. You're the mayor of Brooklyn Center, where Kim Potter, the officer who killed Daunte Wright, was working for. Quickly, you seem to have brought about a lot of changes, reforms very quickly, within a couple of weeks, right after. Can you talk about what happened in Brooklyn Center with Daunte Wright, and then talk about some of the reforms you were pushing for and you were able to successfully push to get?
What happened with Daunte was tragic, and it should have never happened. And myself, I believe that. My city council members believe that. My community really, through a series of listening sessions, almost immediately following the killing of Daunte, the community really stood up and said, enough is enough. It's time for change. It's time for us to have real transformation that's going to lead to a public safety system where everybody feels safe. Not just some people, everybody. And so we got to work right away, putting together legislation that we think could have prevented the death of Daunte Wright. And it's a very comprehensive package that we put together. I think that probably the most sweeping piece of legislation that that's been enacted anywhere in the country, which includes putting the police department along with their fire and two new departments, a Department of Community Response and then a civilian traffic enforcement department. These two new departments that we're creating underneath a Department of Public Safety and Violence Prevention, which is going to be led by someone with a background in public health. So the person leading all four of our public safety departments is not going to come from a law enforcement background, but from a public health background. So that person is going to be looking at the data and the sciences and looking at what we need to do to keep our communities safe from that lens. Important to that also is that we're putting together now a mental health response team that's going to be made up of mental health professionals that will respond to emergencies, as opposed to having law enforcement respond when there's a behavioral health or mental health situation that's unfolding. We want people who have been trained in those areas to show up and actually provide care. And there are models of this all around the country where it's been extremely successful. And then we're putting together traffic enforcement that, number one, there will be no arrests for low-level misdemeanor, non-felony violations, right? And number two, we're going to limit what police can pull people over for in the first place. So no more we're going to have those pretextual stops where they pull you over because of a taillight or because of an air freshener or because you didn't put the turn signal on here or for any number of reasons or expired tab where they tend to pull people over and use that as an excuse for searching your car and arresting you and so forth, right? And even here in Brooklyn Center, we have had, I think maybe about 70% of the stops in Brooklyn Center from police were done, were stops where they're pulling over African Americans, even though African Americans are 30% of the population, right? So we know that there are some real disparities in policing in Brooklyn Center. So we're turning the page and we're taking full accountability for transformation that needs to happen, and we're hoping that other people, other municipalities across the country will follow suit and enact some of these changes as well.
How long will these changes take to take place to be instilled into reality for everyday Brooklyn Centers?
right away, I think within the next 2 weeks, we're going to implement a citation and summons only policy. So for some of these, low-level, non-felony violations, the police are no longer going to be arresting people. They'll maybe write a ticket and say, go ahead, you have to come to court, but no more arrests for those. And that policy, we anticipate will be implemented in the next 2 weeks. In the next 2 weeks, absolutely. And then the other portions of the reforms, we're going to stand them up as quickly as we can, as soon as we can write the policies and hire the people that are going to be doing the civilian and hire and train the civilian traffic enforcement folks and the mental health folks. I would say in definitely in less than a year is what I can say right now, and we're going to be really ambitious about that because on average every 18 months the police shoot and kill someone, right? And we want to make sure that we are having these systems put in place before that can happen again. So keep a lookout. Over the next few months, we're going to be rolling out various aspects of the reform, and we're going to get it up and running hopefully in less than a year.
Wow. Can I ask you real quick? I know you probably have to do things, and thank you for taking this time. What made you in your position so quick to make these changes, to implement these changes where even in America we have George Floyd, and a year on we have the George Floyd Policing Act, which really doesn't even instill some of the changes that you're pushing forward. What happened here? How did you do this?
Well, number one, I have to thank my city council, because my city council ultimately approved these changes, and they, bought in to the science behind the changes that we're implementing and the research. And then my community stood up, and the community came out in droves. Black, white, people of all backgrounds came to these listening sessions, and they demanded the change, right? And for me, being in this position, I've had personal experiences with police myself, right? Where I have been, taken in, been arrested, or been stopped, right? Because I quote unquote fit the description. I've been pulled over for some of the same reasons, the pretextual stops. So for all of those reasons, both our community standing up and saying that, demanding that it's time for change, and then myself and many of my city council really have had either direct experience or experience with police through members of their family. I think all of these factors came together and helped us move forward very quickly. But the most important thing is our community stood up, and our community said, enough is enough. It's time for change. It's time to act right now. And for me personally, this has been a scourge on all of our communities across the country for far too long. We have the ability to start making change now, so we're going to start right now. That's just my view on it.
Anything else you'd want to say?
No matter what community you're a part of, this is now the time for change. Mobilize, run for office, contact your representatives, create spaces in your community where you can start to build power, build coalitions that are going to demand change. And if you all stand up and demand the change in your community, you can have it. I truly do believe that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you speaking.
Yes, sir.
Time.
Yes,
Thanks.
sir.